I'm delighted to have my first returning guest for the show. Product Marketing Manager for Dorico, Daniel Spreadbury, returns to the show to talk about Dorico's recent major release, Dorico Pro 2 and Dorico Elements 2. Daniel, welcome back to the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Nikhil. It's great to be back.
We were talking before the show. It's not really that long ago that I had you come on, and we were talking about, I think, Dorico 1.2 recently with the queuing features and that. And I turned my head, and you guys come up with this major release, Dorico Pro 2 and Elements. So it's quite amazing. I'm so excited to talk about this major product. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you very much. It's certainly been a very, very, very busy and quite intense period of development. And so, yeah, we're super, super, super happy to have it out there and to kind of, deliver the next set of things that we think musicians will need.
Now, the timing is important, right? Because you mentioned in the post announcing this that a summer release before school start or spring and summer, that kind of thing. So the timing is it to help target that education market?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think one of the obviously we love professional users who use Dorico, for producing their compositions and arrangements and so on, but probably the majority of the people who are using notation software are involved in education in one way or another, whether they're instructors or students. And so yeah, it was always kind of the plan that we would have a release around sort of the end of the academic year, so that as administrators and teachers are starting to think about the coming academic year, that they would have the possibility of thinking, hey, what should we spend all of the money we have in our music budget, which is always never enough, but what might we spend it on next year? And hopefully to give them at least the opportunity to think about spending it on Dorico. So yeah, and I think especially with the introduction of the Elements version yesterday, that's really all about having something that is suitable for students to use, particularly for general education, for example, in the US, where maybe composition is not such a big thing as it is over here in the UK and in Europe. And so to have something that is at a very inexpensive price point, but still has a lot of the essential power of Dorico, so that younger composers who are just kind of beginning to make their way have a really good, inexpensive option that still has all of that great high quality stuff that Dorico Pro has.
Let me just read a couple of the features. There's some really major features. You've added video to Dorico now, the ability to process video and to compose along with video now. How big a jump is Dorico Pro from 1.2, which we had talked about a couple of months ago? How big is this major, to put this release into perspective, how big really is this release?
I think in terms of like the number of big features we've squeezed into, it's probably our biggest ever release, which is kind of crazy given that it's actually probably had the shortest time, really. I mean, between 1.0 and 1.1, that was like 7 months, more or less. We did a few smaller updates on the way. 1.030, I think, was in February, and then it was end of June for 1.1, and then it was December for 1.2. And then we did a 1.2.10 around the end of February. But then we didn't really have the whole team working on Dorico 2 until the end of February. Some people were, but others weren't. So we've actually managed to get, video in particular, which required a lot of collaboration with our colleagues in Hamburg in the main sort of Steinberg HQ. That was really like, are we going to get this done or not? And amazingly, it came together incredibly quickly, which was very fortunate because we didn't have any time for it not to.
There's some amazing features. The video, the markers, time code, time signatures, more development in that area, system track, automation, Divisi, Osseas, changing the number of stabs, rhythmic slashes, bar repeats. Wow, it's just a lot of amazing things. And I think one thing that people really are excited about is the addition of NotePerformer now to Dorico. Yes. Now, that was always happening behind the scenes, working with Wallander.
Yep. So I've known Arnie for a long time. It was, when we were back in the old Sibelius days, it was, it was us who he was working with originally to get the first version of NotePerformer working with Sibelius. So I've been keeping closely in touch with Arnie for a long time. And yeah, he was very keen on getting NotePerformer working with Dorico right from the beginning, but it really required a bunch of work on our side. I mean, I don't in any way wish to suggest that we did the majority of the work on getting NotePerformer working, because we didn't. NotePerformer is an amazing product, and Arnie is an incredible engineer and a very, very talented person, and he does everything himself, and it's really, really, really astonishing what he can do. But we did have to do a bunch of stuff on our side to make it possible for him to kind of hook up to Dorico. And so, yeah, that was mostly Paul on our side working with Arnie at Wallander. And yeah, it was a really, really, really wonderful that we were able not only to kind of get that into this release as well, which, even I think as late as January, we weren't really sure that was going to happen, but for then Arnie to be able to actually get his release done for the same time so that actually they could be announced on the same day was incredibly exciting. And it certainly added a whole other level of excitement to what was already a pretty loaded release. But because, of course, NotePerformer is so beloved by Sibelius users in particular, because, of course, they're the ones who've been able to use it for the past several years. And, Finale users have had to sit on the sidelines and not use it. And, of course, Dorico users for the last 18 months haven't been able to use it. So I think that NotePerformer is actually one of those things that keeps people with Sibelius, and so now having the option of using it with Dorico and with Finale, I think is going to be very helpful to us in the long term.
Yeah,
nobody we're very excited to work with
nobody
Arnie about
expected that it was going to come so quickly, because I think before you were saying, we're working with him and we'll see what happens. No, fingers crossed, and then boom, it's here.
Yeah. Well, we like boom. Boom is fun.
Boom, it just happened. And somebody said something interesting on the forums. He was saying, well, with regard to NotePerformer, there's a lot of artificial intelligence as it works with the playback. But somebody was saying that about Dorico as well. It's like as if it's a thinking and breathing software where it feels like AI is in the software helping you while you're composing.
Yeah, we definitely, we talk a bit about it. We say it's like artificial intelligence because it's not. Of course, these days, artificial intelligence, particularly in the startup world and so on, can be made to mean anything. Everybody says their product has artificial intelligence. I think Arnie stuff, it really does, because it's been trained with a whole load of music from the classical repertoire and the romantic repertoire and so on, so that it understands the patterns and the idioms that you're likely to see, and then knows how to respond to that in terms of phrasing. With Dorico, it's a little different in as much as we have built, as I probably spoke about when we spoke before on the last episode, it's all these little interlocking engines that all have one job to do, and there's like 150 of them or something, and it's really about, I suppose maybe it's less like artificial intelligence and more like a really, really elaborate watch, like a Swiss watch, these tiny, tiny moving parts that all have to work together perfectly in order to produce, a harmonious result. And like a mechanism of a Swiss watch, I think Dorico is kind of honed in that way, so that all of these little components work together in precisely the right way in order to produce a result that really looks great. And like you say, hopefully feels like you have an assistant working by your side while you're working on your composition. That's definitely something we want our users to feel. They can trust in what the software does, and that what the software does is actually aiding them rather than ever getting in their way.
Now, you mentioned it in the release, the press release. Although we always try to add features with as broad appeal as possible, we have paid particular attention to two groups of people. People working in music for media such as film, TV, and games, and people working in genres such as rock, pop, and jazz. So with this release, what do you think are the main things that are going to really excite people of these groups?
Yeah, so I think you've drawn a bit of attention to them already. Certainly for the music for media types, I've spent a lot of time talking to people working in film and TV and games and advertising and other sort of commercial music endeavors where deadlines are very tight. Money is very tight. Everything has to be done on a shoestring. They need to mix live performance. They need to mix virtual instrument performance. And so really what our goal is with Dorico, and we sort of take little steps and some big steps in this version towards kind of hopefully producing a tool that is ideal for them, is to really add features that enable them to do those jobs more quickly. And again, we're always very conscious that we're trying to basically, for most of these people, they're already professionals. So they're already using Sibelius or Finale or maybe both. And so what we want to do is really give them new sets of tools that enable them to get the results they need in a way that they can rely on, but do it more quickly than they can do with their current program. So that's why, for example, with the video features that we've added, rather than just like like say Sibelius does. I mean, obviously Finale doesn't have a video feature anymore directly. You use Rewire to kind of sync it up to your sequencer, which has definitely some advantages, but also some disadvantages, because of course then you've got to be running two programs, and you have all of the complications of keeping the timeline in sync between your Finale project and your project and your sequencer or your Rewire host. So that can be an issue. And with Sibelius, that the sync that was put in, golly, a long time ago, back in Sibelius 4, so we're talking like 2005 now, is essentially kind of unchanged since then. There's not really any actual sync in Sibelius. It basically just kind of, the video just starts when playback starts, and it can drift out of time and so on. One of the real advantages we've got with being able to leverage all of the amazing technology that's in Cubase and Nuendo is that we can make the video sync absolutely rock solid. It's very high performance. It's linked to the audio engine. You get a fader in the mixer for the video soundtrack, which gives you a lot of control over how it sounds. You can even, if you can go crazy and do things like stick insert effects on the video soundtrack and include the video soundtrack in the audio that you bounce out of Dorico if you want to, because it's all integrated into the audio engine. So it was all about having something high performance, something that was suitable for the sort of common formats. And, again, we spend a bit of time reaching out to composers and people working in the field to say, hey, what video formats do you see? What frame rates do you see? Obviously, we were to some extent limited by the formats that the Cubase and Nuendo video engine can handle. But luckily, it handles all of the basic, formats and frame rates that are widely used in film and TV and so on. So we were able to really kind of build that in very tightly. And, it's really then about how do you leverage the unique things that Dorico can do in terms of having multiple flows inside the same project. So you can actually have several cues inside the same project, all with the same video attached, and then have the same video, for example, playing back from 2 minutes and 5 seconds and 13 frames at the beginning of this flow, and then 4 minutes and 7 seconds and 10 frames at the beginning of this flow, and be able to actually work on multiple cues inside the same project, and then to provide really not only the markers and the time code and all the time code formats, including correct handling of the drop formats that are used in US broadcast video, but also really cool, the fine tempo window, which actually allows you to do what the old school composers used to do with their click books, that they would sit there and they would kind of look them up. Okay, I've got so I want it to be around 120 beats per minute, but I need a cue after 15 seconds. And then you'd go and look up the click in the click book to find out what tempo you should choose. And so to be able to have a tool that does that directly built into Dorico as well, it's all about trying to give those people tools that actually save them time and make the composition process, because we always want to make it possible to actually develop your compositional idea inside Dorico. It's all about making that process easier and more efficient, and giving them good reasons, hopefully, to look at Dorico over whatever they're currently using.
There was a big request for slashes and developing the rhythm section. Could you talk a little bit about the rhythmic slashes and all the improvements for people working with rhythm sections?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said in my blog post yesterday, the first thing was chord symbols, and we nailed them in 1.1, and the second thing was percussion, and we nailed that in 1.2. And so it's like, yeah, okay, I can nearly do my rhythm section charts in Dorico now, but not quite, because I don't have slashes. You could sort of fake up slashes in a fairly kind of low rent way by changing note head styles and removing stems and so on, but it was all a bit of a kludge, and it didn't work satisfactorily, particularly if you were doing things like transposing parts like saxes in E flat and so on. All the slashes would move all over the place between the score and the parts. It was really not good. So we knew that being able to do rhythmic notation properly was absolutely crucial to kind of provide that next step for people working in those fields of anything that basically has a rhythm section in it. So we started out early on with just the idea of having slash voices. So basically being able to take a regular bunch of notes or chords and then turn them into slashes, and they would then automatically, for example, if you had a chord with 3 or 4 notes in a keyboard part, for example, it would just show 1 slash, but under the covers it would still have those 4 notes, and it could still play back that way, making it possible to kind of copy and paste material and turn it into slashes, and make sure that we had all the different designs of slashes, including some people like their whole notes to be diamond shaped. Some people like their whole notes to be kind of oblique white rectangles, sort of slanted rectangles and so on. So we wanted to have all of those things set up. And then once we'd kind of got that working, we then decided that what we really needed was a really, like a tool that would make, for example, producing a lead sheet or a bass part or something where you maybe need one bar to kind of show what the riff is, and then just a whole bunch of slashes and chords, how you would actually put that together. So we added this idea of the slash region, where you could essentially select from here to there, and then say, and what's neat, of course, is you can do it with a popover. You type Shift R for repeat, and then you just type slash, press return, and that whole region is then filled automatically with slashes. And the cool thing about them is that they actually follow the meter. So if you have a bunch of meter changes in there, and you're going from say 4/4 to 12/8 to 3/4, whatever it may be, then as the slashes pass the time signature changes, they group automatically according to the meter. The job of putting in slashes, I think Finale also has a very quick way of doing that as well. You can basically use what they call a staff style to effectively just kind of splat over whatever music you've got there, whether there's bars, rest, or actual music. You can just put in slashes, and it works very much the same as Dorico's slash regions. But in Sibelius, for example, you basically have to, again, it doesn't take long, but you have to fill up a bar with slashes, then select them and go, R, 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 R to repeat them. But of course, the thing about that is that if you do have things like meter changes and so on, none of those slashes are going to update. So really doing the slash regions thing in Dorico was all about just making it quicker. You should be able to do your 32 bar lead sheet where you've just got one bar of something to set up the head of the melody or whatever it might be, and then your 31 bars of slashes. That should be possible to do in as few keystrokes or mouse clicks as possible, and then it should be it should just kind of look right from the moment that you do it. So we always consider it worth spending the extra time to go beyond, for example, what we already had. After I don't know how many weeks it was, but some number of weeks we'd got the slash voices working, and then we thought, well, could we stop here? We could stop here, but we'd already had the idea to do the slash regions, and so we decided that we should just get on and do them. And it was the same story with the bar repeats as well. Again, you kind of really want to have just a very, very simple method of saying, yep, here we go, here is the beginning of the drum part or whatever, here are 7 more bars of it, number them. All that should be as automatic as possible. And so it's just simply out of a desire to really make rhythm parts that look the way you expect them to look, but take as few key presses or mouse clicks as possible to get there.
There's a very beautiful new font that you guys have released called Petaluma, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And could you talk about, I was really enjoying, I didn't know that there was a person called Ernie Mansfield and Ann Krenitsky. So talk about the development of that font itself, just what happened behind the scenes as you guys were putting that together.
Yeah, so obviously, every one of the scoring programs has at least one handwritten font, because, I find it slightly kind of interesting, really, that we still like to use these handwritten fonts, even though, we used to have the hand copying because we didn't have computer engraving, and it was either published music or hand copying. That was the two things that you could have. But I find it interesting that people really do enjoy having these hand copied fonts to read from, even though, of course, they inevitably end up losing something of the total freedom and kind of looseness of actual hand copying. But they can get pretty close. And so right from the beginning, when I started working on Bravura, which is our main music font, I also started sketching out the handwritten fonts as well. And I, again, spent some time surveying people I knew, musicians I knew, playing gig bands and playing jazz clubs and this kind of thing. Which of the various kind of styles of hand copying that you guys play from do you actually prefer to play from? And they all said that it was the Shure Publishing real books, which are the ones that were hand copied by Gene Krenitsky and by Ernie Mansfield. And they do have they're unlike some of the some of the other hand copying uses quite a fat nib, and so the stroke contrast between the thins and the thick strokes is very, very pronounced. With the real book, though, they don't go quite so kind of marker pen look. It's got a bit more refinement to it, and that appealed to me. So way back, I think 3, maybe even nearly 4 years ago, I started working on a text version. It's basically looking at what was in the real book and then writing myself freehand, and then over time developing a workflow in Illustrator to use, because Illustrator's got some really, really nice tools for creating brushes that can have, different thicknesses and angles. And so you can basically kind of fairly quickly draw letter forms. And once you kind of got your eye in, you can do it pretty quickly. So I worked on a text font, which is now Petaluma script, and got that pretty much done. And it's got some nice things in it that I'd kind of forgotten I'd done. Like it's got the ability to do kind of the sort of special bracketing, overlining and underlining that is often done in those hand copied parts. So I did a lot of work on that, and then started work on the music font. But then we really got down to the sort of crunch before Dorico 1.0 came out, and we just basically had to put it down. And my colleague Anthony, who is the voice of Dorico in all of our YouTube videos and also our UI designer as well, he's really quite an impressive kind of polymath, really, because he can turn his hand and his skill set to all sorts of different things for us. And really very recently, like maybe only 6 or 8 weeks ago, he said to me, I think we should try and finish this font, and I'm going to try and do it. And he basically did, and he has worked incredibly hard and incredibly quickly as well. And again, he had to develop a whole workflow. He's very skilled with a graphics tablet, so he started with his graphics tablet working in Photoshop. So again, looking at the real book and then kind of practicing drawing the musical symbols in the same way that they're drawn in the real book. There was no, we certainly didn't scan any of the real book material, anything like that. We basically drew everything from scratch, but trying to follow the same kind of hand copied style. And of course, the real book has a pretty wide range of symbols, but because it's all just lead sheets, you do not sort of see necessarily every musical symbol, like every clef, say. There's not that many C clefs in the real book. I think there are a few, but there's not many, for example. So you kind of then have to take the style that you've learned by doing the symbols that are in there, and then actually use that to kind of extrapolate out to something that feels of a piece with those symbols, but that starts to have your own personality. And I really, when I was giggling when Anthony showed me, he sort of had this test document that he'd put together with basically all of the symbols that Dorico uses, in the sort of basic notation. So clefs, note heads, ornaments, playing techniques, and so on. And when we got to the page with all the playing techniques on, and he showed me the little hand-drawn versions of all the wind techniques that he'd drawn, I was just grinning from ear to ear, because I think they are so cute. They look so nice. They're so close to the engraved ones that we've done in Bravura, but they just have that little bit of irregularity and personality to them, and they just look super nice. And so when it was all kind of, is it really going to come together? And in fact, we were still finishing the font last week, and it was really, really a last minute thing. But Anthony pulled out all the stops, and I couldn't be happier with the end result. I think it's absolutely tremendous, and the feedback that we've had over the last day or so to Petaluma has been really good. And just like Bravura, we've released it under the SIL open font license. So in fact, it's effectively, it's not quite an open source font, but it is an open font, and it can be used, even though we retain our copyright in it, it can be used and adapted and modified and redistributed. So just as Bravura has shown up all over the place over the last few years since we released the first version of it, I dare say we're going to be seeing a lot more of Petaluma around the place as well in the coming months.
Of the features that we haven't talked about, what do you think are really some major features that are just so exciting that we haven't touched upon yet?
I think for me, and I think the thing that has been also the most work, actually, in a funny kind of a way, is the staff management stuff. With the stuff that we've done, particularly around Divisi, it's really about showing how Dorico's unique approach to modeling a musical score really starts to give you powerful possibilities that other programs just can't do. So, for example, with Divisi, this is where you have your section of typically string players, although as a choral person myself, I also use Divisi writing quite a lot with my, turning a 4-part choir into an 8-part choir, or even more parts than that sometimes. But typically it's, when you think of Divisi, you really think of string writing, and you think of, that wonderful lush sound of Vaughan Williams, or you think of Strauss or you think of Stravinsky, and how, by dividing the string section into, and particularly the violins, into many sort of soloists and subsections, that you can really deliver an amazing array of colors and so on. And that's actually always been really, really difficult to manage in scoring software because, as I've probably said when I was on the show last time, one of the things that is quite concrete about, say, Finale and Sibelius is that once you have a stave for an instrument, it's got to be there the whole time. So if at some point in, the Dance of the Maidens and the Rite of Spring, you need 8 staves for your violin 1, those 8 staves have got to be there the whole time. But what if actually only some of the time you need 4 staves, or sometimes you need 2 staves? Well, now maybe you actually need 15 staves because you've got to have the 8 staves that are labeled the right way for those 8 divisions, and the 4 staves that are labeled for that division, and then the 2 staves that are labeled for that division, and the main stave that only appears when they're playing unison. And that just becomes an absolute impossibility, or at least it becomes highly impractical to manage that. And also it means that, if you're actually composing, how on earth are you supposed to plan in advance? I've decided now I need an extra 2 divisions, but that means that those previous 2 divisions I've got, they've got to be called something else now. So really what I have to now do is go all the way back to the start of the score, add these extra staves, change the labels, now go through hiding or optimizing the staves that I don't need. I mean, it basically turns the job of writing for a divided string section into an unbelievable chore. And what we've done with the Divisi features in Dorico is basically say, do you know what? You just say how many divisions you want, and Dorico will take care of the rest of it. So you can say, okay, I want 6 soloists and 3 subsections. I want 10 soloists. I just want 2 subsections, whatever it might be. And Dorico will automatically create the staves only for the passage where that divisi is needed. So you literally start just with your regular violin 1 section player, and then you tell it to divide, and you tell it how many divisions you want, and it just does that. And the thing that I like best about it is that you don't have to plan ahead at all, because those divisions don't have to occur at system breaks, so basically at sort of line endings. Now, of course, in a published score, that's exactly where they do happen. And if you look at how an editor, obviously you don't typically see halfway through a system in the Rite of Spring, 3 extra staves don't pop up. Those staves are there for the whole system. And the editor will have carefully planned that, and maybe there's 1 or 2 bars of unison either at the beginning of the system or the end of the system where the same music is on all of those staves, and then it's marked, okay, now you're Div A6 or whatever it might be. And that requires a great deal of editorial work and planning and so on. Well, Dorico just does that automatically. So if you have a divisi and the way that the score happens to be formatted, it ends up falling 3 bars into a system, then it will automatically put that unison music in all of the staves prior to the division, and then you can write freely after the division. It's things like that that really no other program can do, because they don't have the same approach to thinking about basically generating the staves based on the musical material, rather than the staves always existing and then having musical material put into them, and then those staves have to be manually managed and hidden and shown. And it's another example of this sort of, as I say, this architecture that we've designed about the way the program models a musical score, that we're really going to be able to carry on building on in future versions. And I think Divisi is our strongest sign yet that there isn't any score layout task that we basically don't feel we can improve or automate or make a lot easier. And I think that the work that Andrew, who did that feature pretty much single-handedly, has achieved over the last few months, because he also did the osiers and the ability to change the staves of an instrument as well at any point through the score, so you can do complex piano music and ornament realizations, all that stuff. But it's the Divisi feature, I think, that really shows where Dorico's smarts truly lie, and how we can come up with, what I hope are not only fairly ingenious, but also very natural and very musical solutions to these difficult score preparation challenges, so that the program, again, it's really working with you because it understands what a divided string section needs to do. And so it just puts the tools directly in your hands to say, cool, divide the strings whichever way you like, and I'll take care of the rest.
Oh, what a time to be alive. Now, let me ask you a couple of questions about, now that 2 is out, what is as much as you can tell me, what's the plan now till the next Dorico 3? And from now to Dorico 3, what's the plan?
Well, we're already working on squashing a few bugs in Dorico 2.0. Obviously, when you know, what is it Mark Zuckerberg says, you move fast and break stuff. So we tried not to break too much stuff in Dorico 2, but there are a few bugs that we need to squash. So we're working on squashing them right now. So you can expect a small bug fix release within a few weeks. We're not sure quite how long. It depends if anybody finds any really scary bugs that we didn't already know about when we sort of push the big build button last week. So we'll hopefully have that done fairly soon, and we will be doing then probably one more update that will have some actual sort of additional features in it. There were some things obviously that we wanted to get into 2.0, and you know, we already got an amazing amount in there, no question, and more I think than I thought we would really, given where we started at the end of February. I mean, we've effectively done it in 3 months really, which is crazy to me that we managed it. So there were a few things that we would like to add that we will work on. It would be imprudent of me to promise specifically what they might be, because you know, software development is hard and plans can change, but there's some more things around the areas that we've been working in already with this release. So you know, for example, with the automation features that we've added, you can now draw in MIDI controller changes and you can draw in tempo changes, and that's very, very cool and opens up a lot of possibilities for you know, shaping the sound and increasing the expressiveness of what you're producing, and you know, tweaking parameters inside VSTs and so on. But that is really only the very first step in that direction. We were planning on doing also a special dedicated lane for dynamics, which would kind of work like the controller lanes, but which would work on the dynamics in your score. Rather like editing the tempo kind of works on the tempo items in your score, we would have a lane that would work on the dynamics in your score. So we're going to try and squeeze that in. And we're also, of course, thinking about what are the other ways of getting that data in. You know, could we import it from MIDI? Could we even copy and paste it from Cubase? How about recording it in real time from MIDI device? So there's various other things like that we want to look at. And again, I can't promise that those are the things that we'll work on, but those are the sorts of things that we intend to work on, as well as, you know, there are a few bits and bobs. Like, for example, we don't yet import slashes and repeat bars from Music XML. So that would be helpful for people bringing rhythm charts in from other programs. So we're going to look at doing that. And we have another sort of a little hit list of little bits and bobs. There were some workflow things that we wanted to tackle in Dorico 2.0 that we haven't managed to do, so we'll definitely take a look at those. But what we don't want to do, I think, this time is now spend another year, for example, delivering a whole bunch of incremental updates. We have some big plans, and so what we want to do is try and get our limited development time kind of onto those big plans as early as we can, that we can, you know, really deliver more very significant improvements. But at the same time, we do recognize there are still, you know, little missing bits here and there that people are waiting for us to fill in. And so we have to carefully balance what we deliver in the short term, in order to hopefully, you know, keep people happy with the version they've got now, but also looking longer term at how we can then really build some of the more challenging and involved things that need longer than 3 months to build, for example.
I want to ask you a Steinberg related question. At high level meetings, do you guys talk to the Nuendo and the Cubase people often and talk about your roadmaps? And I guess all the software is very complementary to each other. So when your discussions with the people at Steinberg, I'm just really curious, how do you guys work with the other teams? And are you guys just basically far away and on your own and just once in a while shooting an email? Or do you guys talk to them pretty often is what I'm wondering about.
Oh, yeah, we work very, I mean, there obviously with, there's 185 people, I think, in Steinberg now. So, and there's only 15 of us in London, and everybody else is either, you know, a salesperson scattered around in a European country somewhere, or they're in Hamburg. So, obviously we are a little satellite, and it's sometimes tempting to kind of disappear off into your own little hole and just work on your own stuff. But as Dorico matures, it's becoming more and more dependent on technology that comes from other parts of the company. Not only is there the video engine that we've added in this version, which meant working with a new set of colleagues who were incredible and did amazing work to get the video engine ready for us to use inside Dorico, because it's the first time it's been used outside of Cubase and Nuendo, which have their own kind of architecture, and Dorico has a very different architecture, so it did need some kind of knocking into the right shape, and they were incredible at doing that. And of course, there's also the audio engine team that we work with, and increasingly also the Halion team, who do the sampler and working on virtual instruments and that kind of stuff, and we work with them as well. So we already have those 3 points of communication from an engineering point of view, and so we do keep a pretty close. We have. Paul, who's our main playback developer, he'll be on the phone daily with Ulf, who manages the audio engine team, when we're kind of in the thick of things. And so we do work very closely, and we have weekly video conferences, and I travel out to Hamburg quite a lot. The engineers tend not to travel out quite so much, but I go over to do, meetings with my colleagues in other departments, and particularly in the run up to this release, obviously there's a lot of different things that had to be lined up. There was, a whole new website to do. We had to meet with all of our colleagues from Yamaha, from the US, from Japan, from other places, to make sure that all of the plans for how they were going to launch the product were all in sort of lined up and everything. So it's pretty collaborative, I would say. I think that it's collaborative where it needs to be, and they also know, I think, the management at Steinberg, who obviously take a very close interest in what we're doing, and I talk to them a lot about what we're doing, and Ben, who leads the whole team, also, and he was in Hamburg today, for example, with the senior management of the company. So we spend a lot of time with them, but they don't micromanage the roadmap. They recognize that when they asked us to build this product, we're the ones who know the customers best. We're the ones who obviously have the experience of building software like this in the past. They trust us to build the relationship with the customers. They trust us to decide what it is that's going to be best in terms of delivering, the right kinds of features that are going to appeal to the customers that we want to appeal to. And they really put an amazing amount of faith and trust in us to let us kind of figure out what we want to do. And obviously when it involves other teams inside Steinberg in Hamburg and elsewhere, then obviously that requires a great deal of coordination. But the organization as a whole has been incredibly supportive of what we're doing, and I feel like we're really kind of bedded in as a proper team that's sort of part of the furniture now. And I'm looking forward to further collaboration with them as we look to develop features that bring the products ever closer together. And that's kind of a longer term goal, of course, and it then does involve, when we really want to do something, for example, that actually affects Cubase directly, then of course we have to align Cubase's roadmap with our roadmap, and that then becomes even more complicated than just using a shared bit of technology. But that's definitely the way that we're thinking as we look into the longer term future of the product.
Now I want to ask you a couple of non-Dorico related questions just for fun. And I know that you're a singer, and I tried to get you on yesterday, but you ran off for a choir rehearsal. So
yes, I did.
So I want to ask Daniel Spreadbury, who's your top 3 favorite classical composers? Go.
Oh, my goodness. Top 3? Oh, blimey. Brahms.
Okay, why Brahms? Why?
I don't know. I've always thought that Brahms is kind of... people sort of think he's a bit uptight. But I find that within the precision of Brahms's writing, and he loved counterpoint. Of course, he was very into Bach and everything else. There's a real beating, passionate heart, and I love Brahms. I love Brahms 3. The German Requiem is one of my favorite pieces, one that I was lucky enough to conduct when I was much younger and would be too terrified to do now, but I did it when I was in my early 20s. And those pieces just, they really kind of get me in the gut and in the heart. And I find Brahms really, really powerful and lyrical as well, which I love. So Brahms, that's one.
Okay, 2 more.
Duruflé, I think, as a singer, the Duruflé Requiem is depends on the day of the week, you ask me, but the Duruflé Requiem is probably the most profound and beautiful requiem setting I think that there is.
What's that again?
Maurice Duruflé is a French 20th century composer.
I don't know who that is. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, He's an organist in Paris, very, very inspired by the music of plainsong, which is also very important to me personally as a singer, as church musician. I've sung a lot of plainsong. When I was a lay clerk at Ely, we did plainsong office hymns every day, one of the few cathedral choirs in the UK that still does that as part of their daily worship. And the Duruflé Requiem is another piece that I first came across as a student, and it has an incredible Kyrie. As a tenor, the Kyrie is my favorite bit to sing, all very much interwoven plainsong lines, beautiful versions, several different orchestrations available, all very beautiful. And it has the In Paradisum that ends the Duruflé Requiem as it sort of floats off into heaven at the end, has the most wonderfully enigmatic sort of suspended chord at the end that sort of just drifts off into eternity. And I'm actually getting chills actually just remembering the last chord of the In Paradisum. It is absolutely sublime.
Great. I'm going to definitely check it out now. All right. And one more person.
Oh my goodness. I don't know how on earth I can choose my third favorite composer of all time. Crumbs. I really don't know. I would rather. Oh, I don't know. You see, I'm gonna sort of show myself to be terribly limited in my musical knowledge if I don't say, something incredibly interesting like Lachenmann or someone. But I don't know. Well, I mean, I think at the moment I'm doing a lot of work with Parry. Because it's his centenary year. I've always liked Parry. He's the composer of Jerusalem and I Was Glad and all those sort of big bombastic English pieces. And I think he's a composer who was in his own lifetime rather underappreciated as a composer. He's
Hubert Parry, right?
Exactly, okay. That's right. So he was one of the sort of early people in the Royal College of Music in London at the end of the 19th century, really very important in rejuvenating musical education and in fact, in many ways, Britain's musical life, which was kind of a big sort of trend of that late Victorian era. And he and Stanford together were teachers to that next generation of composers who we think of as the really great kind of 20th century British composers, the Vaughan Williamses and all those people all came through and were with Parry and Stanford. And I think Parry is maybe underappreciated. Some people find his music a bit sort of OTT and a bit kind of certainly wears its heart on its sleeve. But I'm working with my own choir on Blessed Pair of Sirens, which is a beautiful ode to words by the poet John Milton. Beautiful, beautiful piece of music. We're not going to be able to do it with its full orchestral orchestration as it was originally done. We'll be doing it just with a piano accompaniment. We sing it in Cambridge in July. But I find that piece just, again, sublime. I think as a marriage of text and music, it's really, really something. And okay, yes, it doesn't necessarily have the sort of sublime interwoven sophistication of something like Duruflé's Requiem, but what it does have is a really direct, emotional sort of connection, or at least I find a very direct and emotional connection with that piece. And again, that's another one that I was introduced to actually by my music teacher when I was probably 15, I guess. And that is a piece that I've developed a real lifelong love for. That was 25 years ago, and I can remember every note of that piece. And it's actually the first time that I'll have ever directed it. I've sung it several times, but I've never directed it before this performance in July. So I'm really looking forward to that. And so yes, because it's his centenary year, and because I also think, for example, the song Farewell, which are unaccompanied part songs that Parry wrote as a kind of his own valedictory set of pieces in the couple of years before he died at the end of the First World War, those are also just unbelievably sublime. And so Parry, I think, would be my third choice today. But ask me tomorrow and I'll give you three totally different composers.
You're a singer yourself, so let me ask you, who's your favorite male singer? Just as a history, maybe like a Pavarotti type. Like, who's your favorite singer, just technical singer?
Well, that is a good question. I mean, again, maybe this is going to be too obvious an answer, but I really think that Peter Pears is incredible. Obviously, he much before my time, so I've only ever heard him in recordings and all of his collaborations with Britain and so on. But I think that, again, there's just he's so direct and raw. I find his sort of his performance. I don't know, also something about the recording technology at the time. Everything feels quite kind of up front and not quite so perfect as the recordings that you hear made today. And so I think there's something, again, very kind of direct and emotional about that. And I think that really appeals to me. My voice is nothing like Peter Pears, let me say. I'm a very light tenor. I'm quite handy in high choral sections. That's me. But stick me out there doing Peter Grimes or something, I'm not going to be much use at that. But I think he's obviously an incredible performer. And again, what a marriage of artist and composer that was between Britten and Pears.
And to finally end off, in the spirit of the release of Dorico Elements, which is very much geared to students, what advice can you give to a music student in college?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, I can only share my own experience of being a music student, and I was very lucky. I was able to go to Oxford to read music, and I had the most incredible time in my 3 years at college there. I mean, I know how lucky I am to have gone there, to have been able to have one-on-one tuition with people who were absolute authorities in particular fields of musicology and so on. But I think the thing that I remember more about Oxford, apart from being, I do remember a few of the particular grillings I got from my tutor for an essay that he felt maybe was a bit too close to whichever book I'd read that week rather than my own thinking on the subject. And sometimes, when I would turn up with my scrawled, because I was a student long enough ago that we didn't have Sibelius, so it was on the acorn, but I didn't have an acorn, so I was doing all of my composition work every week by hand, and I would turn up with my chicken scratch, and he would sit at the piano and he would smoke these filterless cigarettes. I didn't realize until my second year at college, when I went to have tuition with another tutor, that my tutor's office was brown and all the other offices in the campus were sort of light cream, and it turned out to be because he'd been smoking these French cigarettes with no filters for years. And so he would sit there with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, sitting at the piano, and he was a very, very wonderful musician, but he was quite sort of, he was very firm with the piano, shall we say, and he'd sit there with a cigarette in his mouth, occasionally flicking it to the ashtray that he got at the left hand, down below the low notes on the piano, and just sort of, he'd go, no, no. So I remember that most of all, and the fact that he didn't call me by my first name until I graduated. It was very old fashioned. But I think the experience that I really treasure about being able to study music in Oxford is just that when you're around a bunch of other musicians who are just as into all this stuff as you are, is that the opportunities that you get to perform and to just try stuff, and normally to somehow kind of pull it off to a really quite high level, those opportunities, unless you're lucky enough to go into performing as a profession, which I didn't. I mean, I sort of did, in as much as I became a singer in a cathedral choir for a bit, for a few years after I graduated, and then sort of moved into working at Sibelius and all the rest of it, and sort of here I am today, etc. But that whole experience of being in a city full of music, and basically every single night I could be at a different rehearsal, I could start my own ensemble, I could try get together just a group of people to try performing some piece, maybe a new piece that somebody else has written, maybe some close harmony stuff, maybe we'd get this crazy idea to book out the town hall and hire an orchestra and do some massed and to do that, and to really experience all of those opportunities to perform music with people who are really, really kind of passionate and believing in music the same way you do. Because although of course there's so much wonderful amateur music making, and obviously I've done my best to lead choirs and to kind of keep that enthusiasm for music going in my life outside of my job over the last 20 years, but it's such an amazing experience. And I if I could go back, of course I'd need to have the energy of a 20-year-old or 21-year-old again, but if I could go back and do my college years again, it would be to do even more of that, to just experience as much as I can of the performing and of the musical life of a city. And obviously if you're a music student who's chosen a great musical town, whether it's Boston, whether it's New York, whether it's London, whether it's Manchester, whether it's Glasgow, there are so many opportunities to be in that world. Take every single one of them. Never say, I'll do it next week. When I finished my finals in 6th week of my last term of my last year, so I basically had 2 more weeks of term after I finished my finals and before I'd find out how I did and so on. I was in a different concert every single night for the last 2 weeks of my time in Oxford, and it was the perfect capper for my sort of time at college there. It was wonderful. The music making is what I will treasure most about my time at college for sure, and the friends of course as well. But really, that's all tied up together. Is all of that music making with like-minded people who are just brave enough to try anything, even if it's crazy. And yeah, I would say if you're a music student today, embrace every opportunity you have to perform, to experience new music, and to really kind of try everything, basically.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show, and congratulations to you and the team for releasing Dorico Pro 2 and Dorico Elements 2 and everything that you guys have done. I know it must have been a tremendous amount of work, and I look forward to having you on again. Thanks for sharing everything, and I'll talk to you soon.
Pleasure. Thanks very much for having me, and I'll see you again soon.